So AI, generative AI, is it the game changer? Talk of AI seemed all everywhere in 2023. And as we understand, it was the hottest topic a few weeks ago at Davos. Headlines extolled the great potential of AI in terms of productivity, efficiency, innovation, but also its great risks, great potential risks. Big job losses, more misinformation, and yes, even greater social inequality. So we are therefore excited and delighted to have Lorena Yee as our keynote this morning to help us unpack and understand this. Since I started my career right out of college at McKinsey, I continue to enjoy good access to some of McKinsey's leading edge research and professional resources. So when I heard Lorena's presentation on generative AI this fall, I immediately knew who we wanted to have as our keynote. Lorena is a senior partner at the Bay office of McKinsey, where she works with companies advising them on growth, organization, and tech-led innovation. She's chair of the McKinsey's Global Technology Council and has become an expert in emerging technologies. And lastly, I will note with great pleasure, she was McKinsey's first Chief Diversity Officer. Lorena, welcome to the Women's Venture Capital Fund meeting.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be with this audience, especially this, and I'm sorry we're not in person because this would all be so wonderful in person. So let me just get started. Let's see, let's just go to the next slide. So we would like to dive into generative AI. And I love those quotes that you have because it really frames the societal level debate. Is it dystopia? Is it the next big thing? And what I hope that you'll come out of is let's get underneath those headlines to actually, what is the technology shift and what is the business opportunity? So with that, let's go to the first page. What is generative AI? And, look, I think this is a very fair question. The first thing I tend to hear is that, wait a second, generative AI, you just put a term in front of AI, and we have been doing AI for years. And to that, I would say yes and no. Yes, we've been on an AI journey for 40 years, in fact, and there's been enormous amount of scientific and engineering advances in that stream. But what we've been doing to date is what I would consider analytical AI. And the magic, or what is so exciting from the science and the technology and the engineering that has shifted, is generative AI is able to take structured data, things that you've been working with before, as well as unstructured data, and put it together in multiple modalities. And modalities is a fancy word for saying it can take text, it can take code, it can take image, sound, video, music. You can imagine a whole array of ways in which you can take all types of data and then also create data with that or create outcomes with that. The basis of generative AI is the foundation model, or LLMs. And these are pre-trained models on expansive amounts of information. So it is not hyperbolic to say like literally everything in the internet, everything you see on Reddit. That is the corpus of public information that LLMs are trained on. And so that would be OpenAI and ChatGPT, it would be Anthropic and Claude. It could even be something on the consumer side, like Inflection AI and Pi. These are just examples of these type of large language models that have been developed, pre-trained, and can give you a new experience. There is also a user side of this, which is before, if you were working on AI, you probably had a crew of data scientists with extremely well-earned and very impressive backgrounds, PhD in data science, 20 years in data science, and the accessibility of that was really limited to those people with the expertise. By the way, still very valuable, still super important and strategic. But with generative AI, the interface has been in some ways consumerized. So all you need to do is ask a question to be able to be a power user of these models and of these capabilities. And that is why many people call this a bit of an iPhone moment, because you took something that might have been very technical, very complicated, and you created such a different user experience that, for example, I have 3 kids. My 3rd grader, my high schooler, and my college student are equally good at generative AI, because they're actually, I would say the 3rd grader is the very best at asking questions. So he might win the prize of being the best power user of generative AI tools, because he's really good and uninhibited to ask questions. And so that's just to say that one of the really interesting things about this moment in the technology shift is that it welcomes really any education level, any age, as the example of my 3rd grader, and any language. So one of the things that generative AI is extremely good at is it can converse in 62 languages. And one of the reasons why it's so good at software is a type of language in many ways. So this is a little bit of an introduction of generative AI has been a real shift in the technology paradigm. And what is it, and how is it a departure from AI? Some people will say that generative AI is literally a catalyst for reopening and putting at the top of the house agenda AI overall. And to bring a finer point to that, I did a 2-day workshop with a semiconductor company. We did a whole curriculum at Stanford through our partnership, and then we came to our Silicon Valley office and we were working through their ideas. They came in with 114 crowdsourced ideas on how they could use generative AI. We landed on 4. 2 of them actually weren't generative AI. 2 of them were analytical AI, and 2 of them were generative. And the point being that the whole corpus of tools and capabilities here can be a business game changer. So let's go to the next slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but one of the key things to know about this technology change versus others in our lifetime is speed. The speed of the underlying technology capabilities is faster than we've really ever seen. And that's actually quite factual. So we went from decades, years, months to weeks. Now, if you think about the internet, you think about cloud, you think about telecommunications and connectivity, those big technology shifts played out over a long period of time. And new capabilities came out annually. Think for yourself. I would buy an iPhone every year and be like, oh, look, there are these new capabilities. But here, every quarter, substantial things changed in 2023. So we started with ChatGPT 3.5 as an example of a proxy of knowledge and kind of reasoning that the models were able to do. It could pass roughly half, 2/3 of the AP advanced placement college exams in the US. When ChatGPT 4.0 was released in March, so 4 months later, it was able to pass all of them, including some advanced exams like the LSAT or like AP chemistry, which is a sore point since my son was studying for AP chemistry. And I was like, oh my gosh, ChatGPT could beat your score. So just it's a more kind of human example, but the distance of fundamental capability is changing very fast. And there were lots of releases all through the year. You could look at Meta, you could look at Inflection AI, there's all these things, but maybe to cap the year off at the end of the year, Google has announced many things and different capabilities all throughout the year. One of my favorites, which particularly is helpful in the banking context, is watermarking, which is a kind of like security way to understand what is AI driven and non-AI driven in images. But by the end of the year, they had released Gemini, only a year later. And Gemini is multimodal. And if you go on YouTube, any of the videos, you'll be like, I cannot believe that this is the beginning of what artificial intelligence can do. And multimodal, to what I was saying earlier, is it really has integrated visualization, imaging, text, music. So you can query it and say, draw me a picture of a blue duck in a lake, write me a song, and you can prompt it and these things will appear. So the technology is moving really fast. So let's go to the next slide. What does that mean? The North Star of all of this, and the reason why this has such a business implication, although the technology, we could spend 50 minutes on how interesting it is that the economic potential is really off the charts. And this is not about kind of the hype cycle. This is really looking at the fundamental ways in which generative AI can drive productivity. We estimate that to be somewhere between 2.6 and 4.4 trillion. Just as a size and scale, the UK economy is about 2.4, 2.5 trillion. So the total potential here is really high. Now, all of you, are saying, wait a second, I've got about 15 questions about that. This is the total potential, likely over 20 years, 30 years. It could take a long time. We looked at how we did this was we looked at 63 use cases where generative AI had a clear economic outcome. And based off of that, we built this calculation. So this is sort of rooted in how generative AI and automation technologies, a basket of them, affect our work. One of the really important differences is in all the ways in which technology has created economic value, productivity value over the last 50 years. This is the first time we've seen a automation technology affect knowledge work. Knowledge work is everything we do. And so in some ways, it's not just a large size of value, but it is associated to a class of work for which technology hasn't been able to provide those efficiencies. If we go one more forward, in terms of what that looks like at an industry level, I just took a couple of industries which I think are probably somewhat related to or closely related to the portfolio companies that you all lead. That number translates differently by industry. And the reason is that what generative AI does is it's not going to take over whole jobs. What it's doing is it's automating tasks and activities within a job. And so one of the ways to think about this is what are the types of knowledge work for which generative AI can have the largest impact. And what I'll show you in a second is that really centers around tasks or jobs related to marketing and sales, software, product development, and customer care. And so industries that have the largest amount to gain from a productivity perspective are often ones where if you look at their workforce, have a lot of jobs in those functional categories. So that's the first point. Let's just go to the next slide, which I was alluding to, which is when we think about the total value, many of the things that I have said is that right now you should think about it as a bit of a superpower for your workforce. It's not going to replace whole jobs, but it can actually take quite a lot of the toil and activities and provide you an alternative way to get things done. And that number is to the tune of, at the upper bounds, 60 to 70%. In actual practice, and let's just take a concrete example, software engineering, we've seen in early days last year that organizations were able to save about 30% of their time using some of the early generative AI tools in software engineering. So for example, GitHub Copilot or Cody from Google. And I think the next question is, well, what was the tool or what was generative AI doing that in a concrete case for a financial institution saved 30%? In this case, what it's very good at are things like code modernization. So a lot of organizations will have an enormous amount of COBOL and outdated code. It can modernize that to Python. It's very good at anomaly testing. It's very good at QA. It's very good at giving first drafts, a very simple kind of coding tasks, not the super sophisticated ones. And what we found in the case of software engineers is that they were saying, we're quite embracing. So it was very helpful and practical. It didn't take their whole jobs, but it created time. And they found, especially for lower tenured workers or lower tenure software engineers, it helped them actually gain their expertise levels better. And so they used it almost conversationally. So it would draft some code, then they would take a look at it, edit it, make it better. And it's almost like, as one person said, think about this as your hardest working, most eager intern. And that you've got a whole team of generative AI interns that are trying to help you be more successful in your job. And why I say they're almost like interns is the intrinsics or the capabilities of these models are very high, but they need supervision, they need training, they need cultivation, they need that interaction with the human. And so in many ways, and they work very hard. So in many ways, the idea that you can take an enormous amount of data and structure and simplify it and give you a first draft, that's in many ways like an analyst or an intern kind of on steroids and working with you all the time. And it is that teamwork between the machine and the human that creates outsized impact, at least what we've seen so far. And that's very similar for call center work that we've seen and measured, for marketing, campaign development, and there's been some really early cases on using this for field sales, inside sales, digital, omni-channel. So those are just a couple of examples. Let me just go one more slide forward. This is what I had mentioned before. Even though generative AI could be useful in all knowledge worker types of tasks, the vast majority of the focus is 75% of which is in marketing and sales, functional roles, software engineering, customer ops, product R&D. Product R&D is really interesting, and it's one of the reasons why you see life sciences companies so excited about generative AI. Oftentimes they're using something like AlphaFold from Google, but the idea is that because of its ability to summarize, source, think through text, it's incredibly helpful for increasing time to market of drug discovery and scientific research. So that's an example of an application. And what I would also say is if we go one more ahead in terms of how companies are leaning forward, let's go one more and I'll come back to risk in 1 second. If we go one more slide ahead, a lot of companies, variety across multiple industries, including McKinsey, we also developed our own tool, are moving ahead with offerings. What I would say is a couple things as you scan a couple of these logos and what they're doing. Most of them are using the solution that they're developing. If you get under the hood, is they're taking an LLM that has public information. They're creating an enterprise instance of it, secure, something where that information doesn't go back into the public domain. They often are taking the LLM foundation model. They're taking their own data, oftentimes they're unstructured and structured data, and creating a proprietary solution that's able to achieve a business result. So to personalize that, at McKinsey, in March of last year, we built Lily. Lily's audience is all of our consultants. And what we did was we took ChatGPT at the time 3.5, because that was what was available. We put 100 years, nearly 100 years of all of our structured and unstructured data, PowerPoint, white papers, things that you've read online, Excel work, and we put it together into a solution, kind of as I described, that power intern or that power analyst to help our consultants. What it's really good at is, let's say it's the first day of your project and you want to get structure and understand how life insurance works. It can do that. We have our own features that are very specific to how we want to use knowledge management tools and information. So everything is heavily sourced, because what we really like to do is have Lily pull together information and prompt you as an analyst or an associate to call an expert and learn more. One of the things that we think this does is it helps our people have the expertise they need, go deeper, kind of work smarter, but also spend more time with clients, because if they're spending less time researching the basics, they can get more time on synthesis, they can spend more time thinking about how different recommendations. We have actually work in the culture. They can spend more time on alignment. I mean, there's a whole entire amount of things that they can do. And so that's just an example. If we go back one slide, one thing that's worth mentioning is that while speed matters, while we have suggested oftentimes to companies to get started, you are getting started in an environment where there are an enormous number of risks in these models. And just this is kind of a framework to give you a sense of the 8 major risks. Some of it is in the model itself. Some of it could be, for example, there have been some very high profile cases, especially with imaging or music. How do you think about infringement and artistic copyright? It could also be things like privacy concerns. So when you're creating models internally, how are you using private data? And certainly, things like malicious use. We think about it, and most businesses are thinking about it with positive intent, but we do know that there are people who will use the very same technology in poor ways. We've also seen a real shift in the regulatory environment, the establishment of global standards. And I think what you'll expect to see over the course of this year, we know there are 2 more AI summits. You'll see probably more sophistication in US and EU regulation, and probably more advancement in opt-in type of global standards and greater alignment on what those look like. Companies are, from a public perception and from shareholders and from their boards, probably held to higher standards. So how you incorporate risk day one of your investments in generative AI are really important. And we talk about this not to say it's a reason not to act, but it's a reason to act and implement differently than you may have in other instances in using technology. So I've thrown a lot at you. If we just go to the last page, which I believe is just the company examples, a couple things I hope you take away from this. Oh, one more thing here. One of the things, if you just go back one slide, one of the things that we've observed is that whilst we spend a lot of time understanding the technology, it's so new, the real work will be the people change, not the technology change. And in order to capture slivers of those huge productivity numbers I showed earlier, it's absolutely imperative that we're not doing sort of generative AI tasks, but we're actually changing workflows and how work is done. And in order to do that, it actually has to be things that are related to your business imperatives. And you'll have to think about not just the technology and the LLMs, but the talent, how your operating model, your use of technology data change, and also incredibly important, which is why it takes a third of this visualization here, is adoption and scaling. I can share with you at McKinsey, we went from 100 users to over 20,000 active users on our own generative AI tool in the course of 6 months. We changed the cost per query significantly down. And, there's both the guts of the operation as well as the people change, which are really important. Having a generative AI tool that only 50 people uses, if your organization is 45,000, that's not something to celebrate. That's just to say, hey, look, this has an interesting concept. So what I really hope, if we go to the last page, what I really hope for this year is if 2023 was a year of awareness, that 2024 will be a year of value capture. I'm happy to take some questions. Edith, you've heard me explain this before to our alumni, and certainly if you have any questions or things that are important for you all to touch on, please guide me.
First question coming from Professor Jan Hammond. What will be the talent needs for companies in 3 to 5 years? Are they going to need to know how to code or any other specific skill sets that you think would be valuable?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. The talent question it has a lot of different layers. I think at the highest level, let's start with optimistic, and then let's go to operational and practical needs and gaps. At the most optimistic level, one of the great things is when you have technology shifts like this, it creates all new jobs that didn't exist before. So the best example of this is 5 years ago, none of us could apply or recommend to our children to become prompt engineers. And recently, I even told my English major college student, my son, I said, you know, one of the things that an English major is incredibly good at is analytical reasoning and asking questions. So I'm not suggesting that you apply to become a prompt engineer at an AI company, but I just want to open your eyes that you actually are qualified in ways that are less obvious. And you don't need to be a computer science major per se to be part of this. And so, you know, that's just kind of a bit of a cute story. And he's actually not applying to become a prompt engineer. He'd probably like to save the world of published books, but and things that are actually touch and feel. But I think it does open up jobs. And if you look at AI overall, it's opened up classes of jobs that didn't exist. The other thing that's optimistic to say is one of the things we looked at in our annual Tech Trends report is we looked at the basic up and down of talent and jobs, and where you see declines in jobs, the good news is that when you kind of look at that over under, there are more jobs being created to compensate for the jobs that have lower demand. And the vast majority of those jobs are technology driven. So it not only creates jobs, but it creates more demand for jobs. Now, I think kind of laddering down on how we've thought about technology jobs, there have been a set of capabilities that make it very hard for a lot of people to participate in these jobs. You have to have coding skills. You have to be a data scientist. Those would just be two examples. And what's really interesting with generative AI is without a PhD in data science, without a master's in computer science, if you had a little bit of coding capabilities, you could actually work with GitHub tools to actually have some of those roles and to learn more of it on the job and to work truly in tandem with the machine to kind of get there. Or you could understand a little bit more how to code, and instead of actually being a coder, you could better understand and be a manager or leader of these type of tools. And so I do think the accessibility opens up, particularly the way this technology works. Now, on the harder side of the edge, I don't think we should shy away from this, is companies, the technology is not deterministic of more jobs or less jobs. Although, you know, there can be some occupations and types of roles that open up. It's very much a human decision, and it's a business leadership decision. So I've had clients who are applying generative AI to grow top line. I've had clients who will say, I'm in a financial situation where I actually need to take workforce down. And so, you know, there is a scenario where you can use these tools and these workflow solutions to have fewer people doing the same things. And it could also radically shift if 60 to 70% of certain job types could be reshaped by generative AI. It also can significantly shape how some current jobs look today. We will need to invest in those workforce transitions. And that's a very kind of corporate way of saying, how do you help people go from job A to that job has sort of be rewritten and to still be relevant, or actually to put themselves in line of sight to be able to be and participate in new types of jobs and wages that are opening up. So this is not a new problem, but I think it is something that will accelerate just given the speed of generative AI.
Great, thank you. There's a trend in a lot of the questions that are coming through, and we probably just have time for one more. So let me try to summarize. How is AI going to be most effectively and cost efficiently used for startups? You know, ones that we are investing in, which don't have lots of resources and lots of team members here. So what would your advice be on that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. With my technology hat on, tech sector hat on, I would say there are businesses that are being disrupted, whether that's positive or negative, on all ends. So for example, if you're in IT services, you would be able to actually refactor how you deliver those services in a pretty fundamental way. The pricing of some of those services could be, refactored. And as well, you could use generative AI in your own internal operations. So there are going to be some types of companies where it actually changes your product service offerings as well as your internal operations. So that would sort of be the kind of the most effective. For the part of your question is, we invest in companies that have small workforces. I mean, think about the point of superpowers and how this can help be, a powerful, kind of your machine learning interns. It can actually help create efficiencies in how work gets done. I think the caveat I would say is for a small company, this isn't about playing with the technology, it's about being incredibly pragmatic on how you're using it. So, it could be an augmentation of market research, for example. It could do first level drafting of communications that just give you people leverage where you can't hire all those heads. But my urge would be to be intentional, because at an enterprise secure level, this isn't cost free. So it's, you play with it in the consumer realm, it's either free or very low cost. But at an enterprise secure level, which is what everyone should be doing, that's at a business level, there are costs to this.